Thanks for listening to OnTarget today. We'll be back with you next week. And remember, protecting yourself or your family will not come at a time and place of your choosing. Have a good week. Hi, I'm Eric Delbert, owner of L.E.P.D, Firearms Range and Training Facility, and host of the weekly radio show OnTarget. Are you against gun violence? Me too. Want to keep firearms out of the hands of the bad guys? Us as well. Want to prevent mentally ill from having access to firearms? We agree 100%. Now that we established that we all agree on the end point, let's have an intellectually honest discussion about how to accomplish these goals. I'll warn you though, that our assessment is not emotion-based or centered around falsehoods and misconceptions, but you will have to commit to the same. All information within is fact-based and not manipulations to highlight one side or another. Though it may seem that we are marginalizing some deaths as not as being as significant as others, the truth is all are significant in their own right, and we only point out statistical significance. There will be no blaming the NRA or Bloomberg, and if you truly want to affect positive change in this epidemic we are seeing in our community, please continue. Like any business or obstacle we face in our daily lives, we must first establish facts about the problem or perceived problem. Sometimes an evaluation will redefine our goals on how to accomplish the desired outcome. In 2016, in suburban Chicago alone, we saw approximately 4,380 individuals shot, with 722 shot and killed. It's a fact no matter how you want to spin it, and it's a fact that traditionally Chicago has had some of the most stringent laws around firearms ownership and purchasing. Are they coming from outside the state? Maybe. But by the end result, 722 deaths by firearms is a problem, if not a very serious one. In that same year, according to the FBI data, there were 11,004 murders by firearms nationwide. People who died at the hands of another. Now don't get this stat confused with over 30,000 firearms deaths that year. The overwhelming majority contributed to suicides. How does a city with the strictest gun laws account for almost 7% of the deaths nationwide? It's a question worth asking if we're going to solve the problem. First and foremost, we must not get mad at the tool or the instrument used. How many protests have we seen in front of Ford or GM? Are there planned marches outside of brewing companies throughout the country? Why? Seriously, why not? In 2016, government reported statistics on the number of fatalities attributed to speed alone were over 10,000. Wait a second, look at that statistic. Car manufacturers build vehicles with the ability to go well beyond the limit of speed that we as a civilized society have said is the maximum allowable speed on our roadways. They're built to break the law. They should be reserved for the racetrack, not our streets. The killing of our children and loved ones must stop. And another 10,000 deaths a year contributed to alcohol-related vehicle fatalities. Simple solution, ban alcohol. How long are we going to continue murdering our innocent neighbors on our streets every day? Again, no protest at Chrysler or Anheuser-Busch, but every town in America has a protest over firearms. The truth is, just like the car enthusiast or the responsible person who consumes an occasional beer, the overwhelming, unbelievable majority of firearms owners are safe, responsible owners who enjoy the sport or silently protect themselves and their family every day with firearms. So when people do horrific things with firearms, should we not be looking at the person committing the act as we do with drunk driving or speeding deaths? No, we blame the tool. And actually, we're very misguided in what we blame. The politicians and the media have led us in the wrong direction. What a surprise. In 2016, there were about 11,000 murders by firearms. But did you know that only 374 were from the evil rifle? That's all rifles, not just the ones that look mean. 374 out of 11,000 murders, and that number has remained relatively unchanged for years. In that same year, 1,604 people were murdered by knives. 479 by blunt objects. And wait for it, this is my favorite, 669 murdered by hands, fist, or feet. What? More people die each year in fistfights than rifles? That's it, we got to ban what? Wow, I didn't hear that on the nightly news, but it's true. Again, we cannot minimize this 373 deaths, but is the scary rifle where we should be focusing on impacting change when everything is considered? If you listen to politicians, we have to ban the assault weapon. Have you ever noticed that in every off-the-wall legislation across the country focusing on assault weapons, the first thing they do is define assault weapons? Do you know why? Because it's a made-up term. You cannot walk into any establishment throughout our country and order an assault weapon. You're being fed a line of bull if you think otherwise. And to confuse matters, these politicians, either intentionally, negligently, or politically motivated, have absolutely no clue of what they talk about. This is why firearm owners do not take seriously those leading the charge for new legislation. Take, for example, Ohio Senator Michael Skindell. Oh, Senator Skindell, I actually felt bad for you a few years ago when you were one of the main legislators on an assault weapons bill proposed here in Ohio after a Florida tragedy. When you spoke opposite of me on one of the local news coverages, you were quoted as saying, "What we are doing is going after the guns that wage war, and that's what these guns were designed for." In actuality, as we mentioned above, in this type of legislation, you must first define assault weapon. And sir, your definition was actually covering almost every semi-automatic firearm, pistol, rifle, or shotgun in our store. I'd respect you much more if you stated you wanted to ban all firearms, but rather you embarrass yourself and your colleagues by once again proposing meaningless legislation that shows your true ignorance on the topic. Mr. Skindell went on to say he admittedly was not the expert on the topic, yet his legislation he proposed would affect me and my family. It really highlights the need to bring knowledgeable people into the discussion. It's okay though, you're in good company. Just Google fellow politicians Sheila Jackson Lee, Representative Diana DeGette, the Assemblywoman from the gun show in California, or how about New York's Caroline McCarthy, or our own Mayor Ginther, and who could forget good old Joe Biden.
To gun owners out there who say, well, a Biden administration means they're going to come for my guns.
Bingo, you're right if you have an assault weapon. The fact of the matter is they should be illegal, period.
A weapon, I've held an AR-15 in my hand. I wish I had it. It is as heavy as 10 boxes that you might be moving.
I read the legislation and it said that it would regulate barrel shrouds. Do you know what a barrel shroud is?
Time. I actually don't know what a barrel shroud is.
Okay, because it's in your legislation.
It's a shoulder thing that goes up.
No, it's not.
Hours of entertainment until you realize that they all have the ability to influence policy and law. And by the way, over the last 7 years, we've reached out to countless state officials and never once have been asked for input until recently. Owner of a gun store, range and training facility, part-time police officer for over 25 years, on the front lines of the firearm debate, and yet not worthy of having input? Does that make sense to you? And if you think the baseless, outrageous legislation is limited to state legislation, just look at some of the off-the-wall proposals recently in Congress and being proposed by even our presidential candidates. I could never understand how politicians at the highest level of government, and seemingly with more resources than most, do not even recognize that they don't understand such a topic. They do not even know enough to recognize their own ignorance. That's where it becomes dangerous. Wouldn't you not surround yourselves by experts for nothing more than to have credibility with the citizens you represent? Are they just too egotistical to recognize their own ignorance? Sure seems that way. And since we're looking at baseless bans and proposals, how about the assault weapons ban of 1994? This is the one that was intended to, well, I actually have no clue in the intent, but the result was utterly laughable. All it did was define cosmetic features of the AR-15 and like rifles. By the way, the AR-15 has been available to the general public since 1964. The rifle is actually named after Armalite 15, their 15th model. It's not an assault rifle or automatic rifle as commonly reported by the uneducated. And by the way, it was sold to civilians before any military contract was in place. The ban eliminated such things as the bayonet lug, the flash hider, the collapsible stock, and the pistol grip. Did it lessen the effectiveness of the round? No. Did it change the rate of fire from the trigger? No. Did it do anything to change the bullet coming out of the barrel? Nope. It was all dressing, enough for the politicians to say, we did something. In regards to the debate on what effect it had on gun violence, let the facts speak for themselves. During the 10-year period in which the ban was in effect, nationwide, we saw a decrease by murders by 44%. Wow, maybe Nancy Pelosi was onto something. But wait, during that same time period, murders by knives were down 33%. Hands, fists, and feet went down 19%, and handgun deaths down 43%. Deaths by strangulation down 46%. Maybe, just maybe, it had something to do with our rate of federal prosecution of firearms crimes during that time. It's interesting to note that during times in which you think prosecution would be most, it actually was the least. During the Clinton presidency, we averaged less than 4,000 federal firearms convictions a year, but that rose abruptly to an average of over 7,000 per year under President Bush, and then back down to 6,700 a year under Obama. Thankfully, that has once again started to increase with President Trump, but maybe the uneducated and anti-gun establishment need to ask the question of their elected leaders why they're not prosecuting more. As a matter of fact, Obama not only prosecuted less gun crimes while in office, he actually pardoned countless criminals who had federal crime convictions. Can prosecutions be directly linked to dropping gun deaths during this time? No, but it's certainly a piece of the puzzle. So we established that many of our leaders really have done not only a poor job at identifying the problem, but even a worse job at proposing solutions. If we were to ask, what would we do? It's a complex topic, but as we say in the business, there's some definite low-hanging fruit that would almost immediately affect change. Let's take a look. First, we need to stop with the emotion-based, knee-jerk reaction to every horrific event. The statistics show that of all mass shootings, now keep in mind, mass shootings were previously defined as 4 or more deaths in one event, but President Obama changed that to 3 or more in 2013. Is it surprising that we've seen an increase in the last couple years? Considering all mass shootings from 1982 to 2016, only 22% of the time was a rifle used, versus 54% of the time the crime was committed with a handgun. Now, there were times when it was a combination of both, but statistically speaking, the rifle, notice, not just the AR, is not the weapon of choice. Please do not mistake our callous approach for lack of sympathy for the victims, but from 1982 to 2016, we saw 816 fatalities from mass shootings. 816 over a period of almost 40 years. In 2016 alone, Ohio had 4,000 deaths from overdoses. Of all the thugs who did all of these heinous acts, would it surprise you to know that 71% of them obtained their firearms legally? That's within our current system. How did this happen? Well, many could have obtained them long before they ever considered their acts, but a few were simply missed by the system. A few years ago, a mass shooter in Texas was prohibited from purchasing a firearm if only his employer, the federal government, would have put the information in the background check system as required. Remember the 9 people who died senselessly in South Carolina at the church shooting in 2015? That thug obtained his firearm because of the inefficiencies in our background check system as well, the NICS system. Since 2013, our industry has stood up and demanded the government fix the system. Keep in mind, in today's environment, we can adjudicate a medical claim instantaneously. We can turn off a credit card via phone app, yet we can't figure out how to tell a reputable firearms establishment if a person can own a firearm in 3 days? Seriously? Put this in the hands of the private sector and we would have it fixed in a year. Guaranteed. The way it works is that most of the time, probably close to 90% of the time, we do get an immediate response from the NICS system of either a proceed or deny with the transaction. The other 10% of the time are delays. That is not a bad thing because the system for some reason says there's something about this individual that could prevent him or her from legally being able to own a firearm. I'm okay with taking a little time to get it right. But the problem is that oftentimes the store never hears back from the NICS system. Let's restate that a different way. We follow the law and submit a background check for the purchase of a firearm, and close to 7 or 8% of the time, we never get a result. As a matter of fact, by law, if we do not hear back within 3 business days, we can legally sell that firearm to the individual. You might be saying, well, you need to take a moral stand and not sell until you hear back either a proceed or deny. But it happens too often to regular customers who are doctors, lawyers, even FBI agents. It happens too often that we can't, as a small business owner, financially afford to take that stance. It's really appalling that not only can we not figure it out in 3 days, but sometimes we never hear back from the system as to a proceed or deny, and the consequences can be deadly. How often does this happen? The ATF reports on this every year. And in a 5-year period ending in 2018, are you ready for this? The system let 19,817 individuals who were identified as not legally being able to possess a firearm purchase a firearm because it couldn't determine in 3 days what should be done. Let's restate that number. 19,817 individuals have purchased firearms in a 5-year period, and at some point, either a day, a week, a month later, after the purchase, the system said, damn, he or she shouldn't have had a firearm, and now we need to go retrieve it. We've personally had this happen twice in the last month right here at our store. Now that's an issue. Actually, an issue identified by the industry and formalized back in 2013 through the Fix NICS campaign, yet it still goes on today. And the South Carolina shooter, Dylan Roof, obtained his firearm in just this way. The system was in the process of trying to retrieve the firearm when the scum killed 9 individuals. The answer is not to expand to 3, 4, 5 days, but it's to fix the system. Too many law-abiding and respected citizens in our community continue to get delayed every time they purchase a firearm, and they have no apparent reason why. And if you're one of those law-abiding people and get denied, the current time for an appeal can take up to 2 years. No, seriously, 2 years. Put this in the hands of the private sector and we will have it fixed. And sorry, but did I mention that 19,817 criminals were allowed to have firearms legally through this broken system? Let's go protest that number. Did you hear the cries for banning high-capacity magazines? Is it 5, 6, 7, 10, or maybe it's an 11-round magazine that should be allowed? How ridiculous. Maybe we should just ban them all and shoot the double-barrel shotgun through the front door, as was famously said by our second highest in command at the time and current presidential candidate Joe Biden. The truth is, it will not impact change to limit the capacity of magazines. Just look at the Florida shooting a few years ago. It was reported that he had only 10-round magazines. I assure you that with a little practice, I can use 3 10-round magazines as effective as someone can use 1 30-round magazine. The notion that this will make a difference is just fooling ourselves and another political move to say we did something. Or maybe we could just take the approach of the Democratic Congresswoman Diana DeGette when she was describing her ban on high-capacity magazines. She says, and I quote, "If we ban them today, the good thing is, over time, all the high-capacity magazines will be done. Because once you use them, you just throw them away." How ridiculous. And by the way, let's for a second, starting today, saying millions upon millions of 30-round magazines are banned and must be destroyed. We're going to take a stance today. And to the criminals who have them in your possession, we really, really mean it this time. You better get rid of all your high-cap magazines or you're going to be breaking the law. There we go. That should do it. So maybe the answer is in keeping the firearms out of the hands of the mentally ill. Who could be against that? But wait a second. Could you not say the guy who murdered the officers in Westerville last year was mentally ill? No one in their right mind would think to do such a thing. Or how about the guy who just shot 6 Philadelphia officers? Or were they simply bad people doing bad things? A criminal? Was the Florida shooter mentally ill or working off years of revenge? We need to bring this discussion in the mix, but it's not as easy as you may think. Do we give our healthcare providers more room for making an assessment that permanently or temporarily strips us citizens of constitutional rights? Do you draw the line when a patient is just depressed from life challenges, or is there a different threshold? How about our military personnel who are working to get reacclimated to civilian life? Are we going to take the firearms from the ones who defended us because they may be struggling to readapt? It's probably one of the most difficult parts of the debate, but it is the most subjective as well. Rest assured, the answer, though, is not as easy as many would lead you to believe. And by the way, the FBI recently released their study of mass shootings since 2000, and only 25% of the murderers had mental illness diagnosis, including disorders such as mood disorders, anxiety, and personality disorders. So we identify the NICS system needs attention and that we need to take seriously the prosecution of firearms-related crimes. But have we said about the need to specifically crack down on straw purchases? You know, when someone makes a purchase of a firearm for the sole purpose to sell or give to someone prohibited from owning a firearm, we should be making examples of these criminals, charge them to the fullest without plea bargains, pardons, or any leniencies. Let's make it so darn miserable and risky that we put these mules out of business. What? You thought we were already taking this seriously? It happens all the time. It is caught all the time by establishments such as ourselves, but it is rarely taken seriously. Does it take remembering the tragedy last year in Westerville where 2 officers were murdered at the hands of a convicted felon and domestic abuser with a firearm? Wait, he wasn't allowed to have a firearm, yet he did because his friend made the purchase in Cleveland. How about trying that friend for accessory to murder and see what happens next time? How much time in prison should we give a gun trafficker who recently purchased 50 guns in Central Ohio and they immediately were transported to New York and to Canada where they ended up in crimes? He had to get the fullest extent of the law, right? Look it up. We often have tied the hands of prosecutors, especially on the federal level, to extend these sentences when needed. We're not serious yet about stopping these crimes. We haven't been hurt bad enough yet. We have seen firsthand straw purchases and mule purchases in our store, and yet the resources just are not there to prosecute. That is pathetic. If we stop criminals from getting firearms through purchases at a reputable store, how will they get their firearms? The same way they always have been for generations. They steal them. They steal them to use in crimes. They steal them to sell for drugs. While most are probably sold on the street, there are definitely some sold through local pawn shops, firearm stores, and online talk groups and gun shows. Would it not stand to reason that an individual at a gun show or maybe a store should have the ability to check and see if a firearm is stolen before they make a purchase? It'd make the bad guy think twice about selling in these places, wouldn't it? Oh, you already thought that a store such as L.E.P.D Firearms Range and Training Facility owned by law enforcement have the ability to check any of these thousands of firearms taken in last year on trades and estate sales? Nope. Actually, you may be surprised to know that even though you bought that nice used firearm at a reputable local establishment, you may actually have just purchased a stolen firearm. How utterly ridiculous is it that our own store, or an individual for that matter, does not have access to a basic stolen gun database? Seems logic to us, but remember, no one ever asks us. The dreaded background checks. We have seen that though they work the majority of time, it still has a lot of inefficiencies that need improvement. Is part of the answer to have the background check system mandated at local gun shows that are the places of commerce for firearm enthusiasts? Honestly, if you have nothing to hide, would you not agree to a simple background check to potentially stop criminals from purchasing firearms at these venues without a background check? Although, again, if we're being honest about the debate, a 2019 DOJ study of convicted felons concluded that only 0.8% obtained their firearms used in crimes from gun shows. It would be simple to do, just set up a few firearms FFL holders throughout and mandate all gun transactions go through the NICS check. It certainly would quiet the anti-gun movement, and I think many would be okay with this extension of an olive branch. The problem? It's going to have little, if any, impact on gun violence that we're trying to influence. And it will become the slippery slope for universal background checks on every transaction. The universal background check, while sounding logical and feasible, is actually not practical, enforceable, or even effective. Think about it. Over 400 million firearms in the U.S. today, and in order for this to work, every firearm has to be, wait for it, registered. The government would have to know where they all are, and surprise, the thug on the street is not going to comply. Remember, they're criminals because they break the law and are not fearful of the consequences of breaking the law. Laws truly only apply to the law-abiding citizens. Remember the piece of crap who killed the officers? He was bound by laws several times over to not possess a firearm. Background checks at gun shows may have minimal impact, but the slippery slope is always feared to not be far behind. The Second Amendment gives citizens the tools needed to protect themselves against tyrannical governments, and having that same government know where all the firearms are at any given time is just not comforting. Why would law-abiding citizens think anything less than confiscation when the uneducated legislatures such as Pelosi, Bloomberg, Biden, Warren, O'Rourke, and Ginther, and don't forget Skindell, continue to be elected and continue to propose ridiculous legislations? Heck, this year during the debate, Beto said, I quote, "Hell yes, we're coming for your AR-15 and AK-47s.
Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. We're not going to allow it to be used against our fellow Americans anymore."
His own words. And just recently, when asked by a reporter, what would a Biden administration look like? People were worried that you're going to come after their guns. Candidate Biden replied, bingo.
Bingo. You're right if you have an assault weapon. The fact of the matter is they should be illegal, period.
You're right. If you have an assault weapon, the fact of the matter is they should be illegal, period. Again, his words. Assault weapon as defined by who? Hopefully not Senator Skindell. The fear of government taking firearms away from law-abiding citizens is a valid concern in the environment. How can the politicians be trusted when they have shown their ignorance year after year? Maybe we should just go ahead and outlaw murder. There you go, that should do it. The unfortunate realities of freedom is that the cost of freedom is not free, but the civilized society has to live by rule of law to maintain the freedoms. Today, it's the mass shooter. Yesterday, it was an airplane, a vehicle, or a knife attack. But until we get serious about solutions in enforcing the law, we should not be surprised at the events. It's going to happen again, and it's not going to be the fault of the firearm or the tool of the day. Bad people do bad things, and they always will, just like they have for years. Should we allow a non-U.S. citizen to purchase the firearms under a loophole that allows purchase under the pretense of hunting, yet doesn't stipulate or prohibit them from buying a handgun? Or do we foresee how such a loophole would allow a would-be terrorist to obtain weapons right under our nose? Didn't you hear how the terrorist in Pensacola, Florida obtained his Glock in December of 2019? It was in this manner. And by the way, right here in Ohio, a non-U.S. citizen can obtain a concealed carry permit. I'm not here to say if that is right or wrong, but we allow this, knowing that the only way for this individual to obtain a firearm for concealed carry is to purchase a hunting license, even though you would not hunt with a 9mm handgun. Does not make sense to me, but maybe I'm missing something. We have to start taking seriously the issue of firearms and start asking the people who know best about these issues. We spoke about the background check form and how a small percentage of the time people are denied from purchasing firearms, as we would hope. If they are denied, though, because of past crimes, how was it that the criminal even completed the questionnaire truthfully? Questions such as, have you had a prior felony conviction? Or have you been convicted of a crime of domestic violence? Because they're criminals. They lie on the form and are constantly testing the system. So why then, when we get a denial because the person is convicted felon or domestic abuser, are we not prosecuting them for lying on a federal form? Oh, you thought we were prosecuting them? Well, listen to these stats as reported by the Washington Post. In 2017, there were 100,012 denials when a person attempted to purchase a firearm. 112,000. That's not bad. Of those denials, though, the ATF investigated 12,700, just over 10%. How many of those do you think ended up in prosecution? 12. Sorry, 12. As the Washington Post so eloquently said, that means that crooks, the wife beaters, the homicidal maniacs who lied to get a gun have little worry that Uncle Sam will come to them and prosecute for lying on that form. Your chances of being prosecuted by the Justice Department for falsifying information to legally buy a gun is almost zero. Where do we go from here? Remember that the tools we're discussing have remained relatively unchanged for decades. Firearms have not become more deadly or more powerful, as many would lead you to believe. It is simply not true. What has changed? Us. Society. Our moral compass, our lack of respect for others, our lack of respect for law and order. Sorry, but it's true. As we said throughout, there are some easily obtainable solutions that would immediately affect change. The politicians and emotionally based protesters need to step aside and let us, the ones most educated on this topic, solve the problem. This is not to say all shouldn't have a voice, but those vehemently opposed to firearms need to have an honest, intellectual dialogue with whom they choose as their leader, and we need to put educated, intelligent, non-emotional minds together and genuinely solve these issues for the next generation. I'm Eric Delbert. Thanks for listening. Tune in to our weekly radio show, OnTarget on 610 WTVN, or catch our podcast on iTunes, Google Podcasts, or right here on YouTube.